Welcome to Relative Mentality. I'm Jack.
And I'm Joe.
We are not here to be therapists, but we are here to be family. And today we're going to be talking about why mental health is important and kind of why we brought up relative mentality.
Yeah,
So, if you,
absolutely. Because, sorry,
no,
talking
no,
about it is
no,
so
you're great. You're
important.
great. You're great.
I feel like that's going to be our biggest struggle is just trying not to talk over each other.
Oh, 110%.
That's
100%.
just family, though. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, why are we here talking about mental health? Well, talking about it is, the first step. And I think that people get caught in the idea of mental health being like, oh, this person has a diagnosis, and oh, this person has like a disability because of this mental health issue. And it's like, it affects everybody, right? Everybody has some level of anxiety. Some people in a healthy way, some people go into a really healthy, unhealthy, irrational way. But anxiety, sadness, all of those things, they affect all of us. And so when we sort of put mental health issues into a sort of box as you've got to be unable to handle life, I think we really miss out on the part of mental health that is just health, mental health, physical health. It's all important to us surviving in this wild, wild world.
Oh, yeah. And especially with everything that's kind of going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, cut into the fourth wall a little bit. And, we're doing this at the end of April when there's been a lot of talk from
Mm,
RFK of, autism and then now I guess ADHD and
yeah.
anxiety and all this, that, the other. And I know when we initially started talking about wanting to do this, it was kind of we know with our upbringing and everything that mental health wasn't necessarily talked about.
Yeah.
And if there was something that was different or taboo or whatever,
Mm,
we just didn't talk about it. We just kind of moved on. And so I think one thing that I think generationally there is a shift societally that's happening, but I do think that
mhm.
there are obviously still caveats to that, whether or not it's a young generation, old generation, older people getting into understanding mental health, and then younger people that are like, well, I'm gonna pull myself up by the bootstraps type of thing.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so a big event that really impacted mental health in any capacity, but obviously more in a negative way, was the COVID pandemic, and then kind of
Absolutely.
not necessarily using it as a litmus test, but like seeing how people responded to that, because there are some people that are like, oh, it was, a pandemic, or oh, it was this, that, and the other, and didn't think much of it. And it's like, even if there wasn't, the tens of hundreds of thousands of people that died, and if even if it wasn't the economy impact and this, that, and the other, there was still many, many months where it was like, the first couple of weeks where it's like, you cannot leave your house. And then from there, when it was like, you can start to go into buildings, but you have to be masked up and you have to be 6 feet apart. And like, it took an impact in general. And I think
Yeah.
there's a conversation of even just trying to understand, hey, literally everything affects you, good, bad,
Mm,
indifferent, whatever. And one thing I've definitely been learning is, how to understand my reactions to things.
yeah.
But again, without having that initial conversation growing up of like, it's okay to feel these things or not, I'm now starting at, ground zero at
Mm,
20 some, 30 some years old. Because
yeah.
I've luckily been going to therapy for a while. But yeah.
Yeah. And, like you said, everything can impact it. And I think, again, when we're thinking about mental health, people are thinking war impacts mental health and is traumatic, right? Um, Poverty, like some of these things that were like, obviously that's going to affect your mental health. But we also have to remember how, like, there's a lot of small scale things that are going to affect your mental health as well. Just the environment you grow up in, your family. We can get into that. We'll definitely get into that intergenerational trauma piece later. But it can be school, it can be your job, it can be just anything and everything can affect you. And it's important to remember that because it affects you and not another person doesn't invalidate the fact that you are affected by it, right? Doesn't change the fact that this is a struggle for you or you're going through something. And I think you're 100% right. The COVID pandemic really brought that out in people. And it really also, I see this a lot with younger people, high school age kids, younger kids. It really messed up socialization for like kind of a whole generation of people. That 2 years of online school and, are we going in, are we not going in? Like it really affected teachers, it affected parents, it affected kids, it affected all of our ideas about socialization and really made us have to take a closer look at that social emotional aspect of each of our lives. So I think, yeah, it really did thrust us in a way. The mental health field was already going in that direction. There was already that growth and that sort of understanding starting to happen. But yeah, the pandemic really was like a this is Sparta like moment of you better get ready because this is gonna be all of the mental health issues blown up. It's totally on a new level.
Well, and again, it's one of those things that I know that we're definitely kind of trying to talk relatively high level about things and just kind of why we wanted to have this conversation because we are absolutely going to deep dive into a lot of these different topics. But it was funny that you mentioned poverty in particular because this is again another element of like you don't know what you don't know. And
Mm,
so having this type of conversation because I remember growing up I thought I was middle class because there was the fancy houses in the one area, and then there were meth houses in a different area, and I was happily in the
mm,
middle. And then when I moved out of, our hometown, and I am now in Georgia, in suburbia of Atlanta, and I've lived here, at the time I lived a couple years here and then moved back home, or not moved back home, but like visited. And I was like, oh no, the water is so harsh that it is literally deteriorating the parts of the bathtub. And, I can actually see the sky because there's a hole in the roof of the trailer. Oh, this is actually poverty. But I just
yeah.
didn't know that because I didn't know anything else. And so that's applicable, at least in my head, because it's like, obviously, everything, including coping mechanisms and the understanding of the world and how it impacts me and affects me is
Mm,
a what I experience, but then on top of it, what I'm told on how to experience it growing up.
yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of, and I'm sure you had this as well, of like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, I'll give you something to cry about, like that type of
Ah,
stuff. And so
yeah.
it's like, that's, it, I had been told multiple times when I would cry, does this make you feel better? And the answer is yes. That person didn't care. They were like, I like pretty much I don't believe you. And I'm like, oh, cool. That's like looking back now, I'm like, that's a fucked up thing to say to a child. Even if it's not the best response to a situation, that doesn't mean that my feelings were invalid, but
Mm,
that's what I was receiving was these are not valid feelings. Like suck it up, buttercup type of thing.
yeah, absolutely. And just
Yeah.
like the way, like keeping in mind mental health from, again, like low level anxiety through neurodivergence, all the way up through like schizophrenia and psychosis, like all of that is basically just our brain doesn't work the way that normal people's brains work, right? And so a lot of people do sort of have their experience discounted or told it's wrong or they're being overly dramatic, that's when I always got, listen, I am dramatic. I'm never gonna pretend I'm not. But, you know, that's because I finally at some point embraced the fact that people were like, you're too dramatic. And I was like, all right, you want drama? Let me show you drama. Um, yes. But sort of all these ways people discount that. And it's like, it's not because you're making a choice, it's because your brain really just doesn't work within the confines of this society and this time and place in which we live, and whatever some person decided was what a normal brain looks like, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. So I think that's also really a thing that happens is we get discounted because the other person can't understand how our brain could work that way. While
Oh yeah.
simultaneously, you're like, I don't understand how not to have my brain work this way.
Well, and it's
So,
all like, again, it's this is gonna sound, maybe too lovey-dovey or whatever, but it's like your feelings are always valid.
mm,
Now, your reactions to those feelings or your actions to those feelings might not be where it needs to be,
yes.
but and that's a lot to learn. But again, with us, and this is why I kind of bring it back to like the whole like talking about mental health in general, where it's like when you don't have those conversations and those understandings, it can be a very isolating thing. And not to be like
Mm,
boo-hoo, but again, with how we grew up, it was a lot within our family of like, it's different, it's taboo, we don't talk about it. If we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist.
mm,
And just because we don't talk about it and it doesn't exist, doesn't mean it isn't existing. So now we
yeah.
have to, the person needs to suffer in silence because, oh, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to bring it up. We're just going to ignore it. And of course, on a personal level, that's going to fuck you up because it's like, anytime now things come up as an adult, I'm like, don't even think about it. It's not there. That's a shit way to cope. Like, because in
Yeah.
fact, you're not coping. Like, ignoring is not
Yeah.
coping. And then on top of it, it's like when mental health kind of goes to the shitter because you're ignoring it or whatever, then that's when you can actually start getting into, you're going to start impacting other people in your life. Like, it's one of those
Mm,
things that it's like, if the people genuinely care about you, they're going to see that you're off and they're going to see whatever. But if everyone around you, including yourself, is okay, well, this is uncomfortable, we're not going to talk about it, then
yeah.
you're going to keep suffering in silence. And then they're going to start feeling weird about you and like, oh, I don't know if I can bring this up or if I should talk to this
Mm,
person or whatever. So I'm just going to ignore it, which again is then more isolating. And then it can
yeah.
get to the part where you now start having physical issues because if your anxiety is through the roof, you're now experiencing fatigue. And I please correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that there can even be like chronic illnesses that are developed when you're over, like constantly overstimulated and over anxious and this, that, and the other.
Yeah,
I believe that's the
absolutely.
case.
The mind body connection is, we are learning more and more every day about how much there is. So there's like a new study I read about where they were looking at our stomachs and that there's actually neurotransmitters in our stomachs. So just like our brain, where there are neurotransmitters that are going to pick up things like serotonin and the like feel good chemicals, the not so feel good chemicals, the hormones, all of those things. Well, it's actually also happening in our stomach. So um, like the link between uh, our stomach, which is like sort of the center of our body system, and our brain are linked in this way, so that mental health can be affecting our stomach without us even realizing that it's happening, or our stomach can be affecting our mental health without us even realizing it's happening. And so I think more and more we're realizing how connected the mind and body are. Like we've always known, right?
Oh,
But I
sure.
think like really starting to realize scientifically how these pieces really affect each other. And you're totally right. If you are struggling with something, depression, then you're tired, you don't have the energy, you don't have the motivation. Like it you can feel physically ill, you can struggle to eat. Like there's a whole host of ways that uh, the mental and physical health barrier is, well, I guess not a barrier, rather the way that mental and physical health are really intertwined in in how we feel and how we cope and how we survive.
100%. I mean, shit, there are some people that like, they end up blacking out or dissociating or whatever. And like that
Yeah.
obviously looks can be very I don't want to say jarring because that feels too harsh of a word, but it definitely is. It's like if you don't know what's happening, you could potentially
Mm,
think that they're having like a grand mal seizure or something of that nature because they're just staring off the distance, completely non-responsive to, you
yeah.
trying to reach out to them physically. And then on top of it, on another, physical aspect, it's like, unfortunately, we have seen in our own lives how when certain things aren't talked about, abuse comes in
Mm,
regards to substance abuse and
yeah.
then, potentially addiction and things of that nature. And it's like, and that in it of itself, depending on what you're abusing and how much you're abusing it, I mean, that's literally taking a toll on your liver. That's taking a toll on all sorts of different parts of your body. This isn't necessarily meant to be like a come to Jesus meeting. It's mostly to because I find that that's more of a like a you're wrong and we need to
Yeah.
tell you how to fix this. But this is more of just a let's just talk. Let's just have a
Mm,
conversation. At least that's how I am thinking of it type of
yeah.
thing.
And it's interesting because when you said abuse, my mind did not go to substance abuse. I thought you were
That's why I
talking about
clarified.
like, I thought you were talking about like abuse between people, but like that is also a thing that comes with it, right? If I
Oh, 100%.
have not dealt with my own mental health issues, then I might be reacting in an unhealthy way to someone else and treating them in an unhealthy way. Or if I have trauma because I was treated a certain way, there's a very good chance that we'll end up treating someone else that way if we never really deal with it. So it also really, again, that goes back to relationships as well. If we are being told always that our feelings are invalid, then if someone is hurting me, why would I think the pain I'm feeling is valid and something that I should also sort of like speak up against? Or if you tell me to stop crying all the time or there's nothing worth crying about, why would I think you would care that I'm feeling hurt by this
Oh yeah.
person, or it feels normal to be hurt by someone because I was always crying, so I'm just still crying sort of thing. Yeah, I just wanted to go on that other the other path with that.
No, 100%. And that's the thing too that's really kind of mindfucky when it comes to generational trauma and things like that is there's also the whole, well, okay, so I didn't hug you that much. At least I didn't beat the shit out of you. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm like, first and foremost, comparison is, the thief of joy and also the
Mm,
thief of healing, in my opinion.
yeah.
It's one of those things that I'm like, I'm not saying, like, me saying this thing sucked doesn't mean that your thing sucked less. And
Mm,
so, or your thing sucked more, so I shouldn't feel sad about my thing. Like, we had separate things happen to us. They were both bad. Okay,
mm,
how do we move on? And not in a let's ignore it and move on, but like how do we look at it and continue and then move on? I've had some not great things happen in my life, and I didn't realize
mm,
without acknowledging certain things and things of that nature. It wasn't until I acknowledged it and said, yes, 1,010% this thing happened. I literally felt a weight come off of my shoulders, and I don't know how else to describe it. It sounds hokey, I know, but I'm like, this had impacted me for years that I didn't even realize. And it's one of those things that, again, had I just ignored it or been like, yeah, okay, whatever, or what, things of that nature, I could still be making decisions with this veil that I didn't know was there. And so that is why like I will beat this horse until it is dead, until it is ground horse, until we make it into ground horse burgers because I'm like as sorry, that's a little fucked up, but
I was
it's
thinking more of like ground horse lasagna, but yeah.
yeah, that's more in our family's wheelhouse, but um it's one of those things that I think talking about it is honestly potentially the biggest part because
Yeah.
yes, constant work is going to chip away at it, but until then, it is this looming monster of, we're not going to talk about it, and in not talking about it feels like it gives it more power on whether or not it's your anxiety or your anger or your frustration. I don't know. That's been my experience. I feel like I'm talking a
Yeah.
lot.
But it's because it's stigmatized, right? And so when something is uh stigmatized, it definitely feels like a weight. Like again, sort of feeling like this is something I'm doing or I'm choosing, or like I had some sort of involvement in making it happen. And so when we talk about it, um, then it really can help us to realize we're not alone. So this is a story I share with people quite a lot, actually. Um, I went to grad school in Chicago, and that was the first time in my life I had really ridden public transportation like to that level, because I had always had a car, but my school was downtown, and I was like, I'm not paying $30 to park in downtown Chicago. Anyway, point is, I took public transportation. I remember one morning it was so cold, just so cold, and as being someone from Ohio, you'd think this would have happened to me before, but the the boogers in my nose froze legitimately. Like
I can't wait to hear how this connects to mental health.
like
I can't
frozen.
wait.
So like frozen, like little icicles in my nose, and I was like, what the fuck? Like what is happening, right? And so I go to school. I'm in like 30. I'm in grad school, and I go and I'm talking to someone, and I'm like, the weirdest thing happened to me. My boogers froze. And what I found out throughout the day is that everybody went, oh yeah, that happens. I talked to my dad about it. He was like, oh yeah, that definitely happens. And I'm like, how did I live for 3 decades and never know that the boogers in your nose could freeze? And it's because the topic was boogers. And so it was something that people don't want to talk about. Even when I tell the story, right? Like there's a certain amount of people being like, okay, we're talking about boogers, what's happening here? But like the fact that nobody ever talked about it meant if I hadn't directly experienced it in real life for myself, I didn't even know it was an issue. And so that's how I feel about like mental health. It's happening to everybody
Oh
who's
yeah.
going through these situations, but nobody's talking about it. So each person who experiences it feels like it's a unique experience, like, what? This is wild. This is crazy. This never happened before. What's going on here? And because it is a taboo topic, much like, you know, boogers or poop or whatever. And so when we have conversations with people about those sorts of things, we find out, yeah, my experience really isn't that odd. My experience really isn't that different. And so actually that's one of the biggest lessons I learned from grad school. I'm sure I'm sure all of my professors are happy to hear that that was a defining moment in my mental health education. But it really was. It was one of those moments where I was like, oh, this story needs to get locked in my head. And here I am years later, and I still, on a regular basis, use this story to try to help explain like the importance of talking about mental health.
That also brings up a good point too of like or I'll say it this way, like something you said also jogged like another thought for me in that A, if we don't talk about it, we don't know other people are experiencing it. And so
Yeah.
then it again it is very isolating. But then there's also the whole comparison thing then, because then it's like
Mm,
there's almost an imposter syndrome within it when you first
yeah.
start out, because you're like, oh, well, my ADHD isn't like this, or my anxiety isn't like that. Do I actually have that? Or is it
Mm,
unfortunately all in my head? And it's like, oh, well, just because, your boogers didn't freeze or not all the way or whatever, does it mean that they didn't freeze? Does it mean that you're not experiencing something similar that almost sounds like a quintessential Chicago experience?
yeah.
And and that, again, if you don't take that first step, you can't do the rest. There's nowhere for you to go if you're not going to take that trip. And so thank you for sharing. I did not know that story. It is a weird it's like I can't wait to know where this is going. But yeah,
That's most of my stories. To be fair, that's most of my stories. It starts and you're like, okay, I'm buckling up for the ride, Joel, and I know you'll get us there, but I don't know how.
hey man, I love a good story, so I am down for it. Truly, it's like if you don't talk about it, then you don't know how it impacts you, because you're not
Mm,
even looking at that aspect of it. You're not looking, not to say that everything that you experience needs to be overcome, because mental mentality, mental health, this, that, and the other isn't all bad. Like it's
mm,
all not sadness or anger or, depression or anxiety. Some of it is, this made me feel great,
mm,
and on the adverse side, you can have people who are like, this made me feel great. And you're like, that should not have given you that emotion. So, like, let's talk about it. Let's unpack that. But it's like the more you talk about it, the more you can kind of understand yourself as well. And in a world where individualization almost causes isolation, because we don't want to have a
mm,
conversation on connection with people, because we're too scared that, oh, I'm going to be too, needy, or I'm going to be too anxious, or I'm going to be judged for whatever reason.
yeah,
It's like one of the things that I learned in my 20s that I constantly take with me is the right people will be with you no matter what. And kind of if they wanted to, they would. And that doesn't just go for partners and relationships, that goes for literally anybody. And
yeah,
there is a slight caveat to that it's like, okay, well, if they wanted to, they would. Okay. But they're also going through this thing. And I know that. So I wish they could be here for me, but I know that they physically can't right now because they are going through their own struggles. And so, kind of understanding that balance as well, there is a strength in understanding yourself that I find that, like, understanding myself, I can then better understand other people as well, or understand that I won't understand what you're going through. And then
mm,
let me give you this in the best capacity I can. And it might not be great, but if we at least start having that conversation, we can then have the conversation of, how can I show up for you? How can you show up for me? But if we don't ever start that conversation, first with ourselves and then with others, you can have all the friends in the world and still be alone.
yeah.
So,
And
not to
that's
make it sad.
really where, yeah, that makes sense. Like that's really where the empathy comes in, you know. Empathy, we have to first understand ourselves a little bit and what we deal with before we can look at someone else and say, okay, I have not lived your experience, but I understand that this can take an emotional toll and what that can be like because I can look at my own history and see where emotional tolls have been taken, right? So for us to be able to be empathetic with others and support people who maybe are dealing with mental health issues or just, you know, having a hard day, if we understand ourselves and what we need and we're willing to have the conversation with ourselves, then we're going to be 100 times better at having that conversation with somebody else.
100%. I'm not gonna try to sound like I'm this, magnificent mental health
Mhm.
person, because obviously I still struggle with my own things. With everything happening in the world, I sometimes have to say, you know what? We're gonna shut brain off. And I'm like, that still might not be the best way to handle it, but that's the current coping mechanism or whatever. And then I just need a moment to not be a person. Okay, great, now we're back. Let's do this, that, the other. Having said that, it's like I have seen personally where my mental health journey has positively impacted other people, because it's like I tell somebody, oh, my therapist told me this. And it was like a oh, for me. And I'm like, can you believe? And they're like, hold on, I need to now internalize this because that actually meant a lot to me as well. Or, having conversations with my mother in regards to the different traumas that we have experienced to some degree.
Mm.
And it's like, this is what I experienced. And I know that that's not what you experienced when you were little, but both of our situations were valid and we both deserved something different when we were growing up. And like that was something that my mom had to take away and think on.
Yeah.
Growing up, her and I did not have a great relationship. And now we talk almost every weekday morning. And it's
Yeah.
because there was an impact there. Now, again, I'm not a perfect person and I know I still have a lot to learn. But without that first conversation,
Mm.
there's nowhere for me to go. At least that's what I've experienced.
Absolutely. The first step is the hardest for sure. Not to say all the steps after that are easy breezy, beautiful cover girl, but there's already some sort of momentum going, right? And you're already feeling some sort of success once you have sort of made that first step. Or you're putting yourself in an environment, like i.e. going to therapy, where you're just putting yourself in the room where these conversations are going to happen. So even if you're not necessarily ready to start those conversations, being in a therapeutic situation, even for someone, going to like AA or some sort of group or a support group after someone dies for grief, stuff like that, you don't have to be ready to start a conversation. You just have to show up, put yourself in the room, put yourself in the space, and listen. And then that often is what really gets things going and turning and um, moving in a beneficial direction.
And also just understanding that just because you're starting doesn't mean you have to have an end goal in mind. Because it's like there are so many things where it's like, oh, had I just been like, okay, well, I'm gonna go to therapy so that I can be fixed. And it's like there's a frustration then where it's like, okay, well, that this is now session 5. This has now been a couple months. Why am I still fucking depressed? It's like, oh, well, because new things have happened, and yes, you've gotten better coping mechanisms, but you're still having to deal with these things that are way above your mental capacity or, what you were growing up with. So it's one of those things that it's just like, okay, yeah, you don't have to have the answers, and that's okay as long as you start. Yeah, you were talking about going in the room. And it's like, yeah, no, literally, as cliche as it is, showing up is is the first part. And however that looks, you don't have to have a monologue of like, oh, this is why I'm here. It can literally just be like, I'm here. You do all the talking, therapist lady, or you do all the talking, other person. This is all I'm capable of today. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
And you brought up a good point about how quickly people would like therapy to be done with, would like this journey and this process to be done with. And here's my sorry to everyone. This is a lifelong thing. Like it just is. Mental health is part of your health, and there are going to be parts of it that are always going to be involved in your life. And part of the reason for that is my belief is that a lot of like anxiety and intrusive thoughts that we have are based on sort of our primal selves, right? Like, there is a lion. I need to run. I'm going to get anxious. Well, we don't have to run from lions anymore. I mean, at least not most of us. But then we get that same reaction while we're sitting at a desk taking a test. But we're living in a space where you can't just get up and run around necessarily and burn off those chemicals. So there's our primal self. And there's also I just call it our programming. And that's sort of the stuff we learn in like the first 5 years of our lives, make up to like the first 10 years of our lives, right? And that is stuff that is so deep rooted at the core of who we are as people, because that's when we're learning what it means to be a person. So if we learn unhelpful, unhealthy things in those early stages, in that early programming, then we are not just at 30 going to be able to say, okay, I don't want to do that anymore, so I'm not going to. Everything has been built upon these foundational blocks of something that was not good. And so we have to sort of work through all of that. We have to get rid of some of those filters. We have to do a lot of work. So I always tell people, like, it took you 20 years to get to where you are now. I'm not saying it's going to take you another 20 years to feel better, but it's going to take time. And if we think a year or two to get us to a place where we're really like feeling good in comparison to that first 20 years and in comparison to the next 20 years is really a small amount of time. In the therapeutic world, usually we think of 3 to 6 months as brief therapy. So that's for someone who's dealing with an adjustment or, is just like, I lost my job and I just need some support after that. Like someone who's going through something that can be dealt with in a very brief amount of time. But that's not most people. I would love to be able to get people in and out in 6 months when, as a therapist, if I thought that was going to work, but it doesn't. It just doesn't, This is definitely a journey, right? And it's probably going to be a journey for the rest of your life, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be a struggle like it is in the beginning when we're first stepping into that room, when we're first going to that space and saying something has got to change.
And I think another aspect of it as well is the fact that it's not linear. Healing is not
Mm.
linear, all of that. And so there can be a frustration again if you're not having conversations with people in this and the other where it's like, okay, I'm focusing on myself. I love that for me. We're going to therapy. All right, fine. It's not going to, this impacted me for 20 years. I'm not going to get over this in a session. It's been 5 years and yet I'm still struggling in different forms. I'm a failure. And oh, fuck, is that such a bad mentality? But that's, again, depending on how you were raised. If I'm not an immediate success, then I'm an automatic failure. And it's like, no. And even societally, it's like, okay, well, now you're wasting money. You've been doing this for how long and you've not gotten better? And it's like, okay, so first and foremost, you're not exactly the star beacon of mental health. But, I'm just like, but it's like, it hurts a lot when I have experienced regression in regards to,
Mm.
oh, I thought my mental health was better. I thought my coping mechanisms were better. Obviously, I'm still struggling with X, Y, and Z, but like I've done the work. I should be able to just hop into these new coping mechanisms that I've learned. And it's like, well, no, you were raised a certain way. As fucked up as this not great coping mechanism feels safest to you because that's what you've dealt with for the
Yeah.
longest time.
Yeah.
And again, without, because I don't want to necessarily be too preachy and be like, well, if you're not going to a therapist or you're not having these conversations, you're a failure as well. But it's like the longer you wait to have these conversations, the harder and longer it's going to take to be able to feel better.
Yeah. And I agree. I'm never going to say it's too late for anyone, but an 18-year-old has an advantage going into therapy to do this work because one, they're closer to the time when they got programmed. So they have better memories and connections with that we can actually like latch onto and look at. Um, Two, there's just a lot less junk you have to get through. If you don't start therapy until you're 60, that doesn't mean therapy won't work for you. It just means there's a lot of new tricks you're going to have to learn after learning a lot of other tricks. And so it's like that old dog new tricks thing, right? And so I don't think that that has to be true, but I think that it's just naturally true for a lot of people. Even my mom dealing with she never really dealt with some of her mental health issues until after I went through my struggles. So she was already in her 40s, going into her 50s. And there was even a point where she was like, this is just as far as I can go. Right. Like I'm at a place where I don't necessarily want to go to talk therapy and bring things up from 40 years ago and go through all of those things and whatever. I can recognize that maybe medication can help and like maybe there are ways that I can be thoughtful and helpful, but that, like I don't have the time, energy, whatever to put the work in to totally try to revamp who I am at this point. And so, yeah, we have to, and you have to respect that in someone, like being able to recognize like where they're at and what they can do. But yeah, it really is an advantage the earlier you start this work, but that doesn't mean that the work is ever not going to necessarily be helpful. It's going to be as
100%.
helpful as you think it's going to be. Right. So, and that's what I think I noticed more with people who are older is that they just aren't convinced that it's going to be helpful. Right. And so then it's not helpful, maybe more than, people in their 20s or 30s, certainly. And that could be because of age, like generational, like the age in which we grew up and what all of that looked like. And it could just be like, hey, if I could do this for the first 50 years, there's nothing to say I can't do it for the next 50. So who gives a shit? And it's like, good luck.
Yeah, it's one of those things, yeah, where it absolutely is, and this is going to sound harsh, but I don't mean it to be as harsh as it sounds, but it's like I can only help you so much. You have to be able to want to help yourself.
Exactly. Exactly.
And so it's again, like it's one of those things where it's like if somebody watches this episode and they're like, yeah, these ladies are just full of themselves and whatever else, I don't need this help, then it's like, well, then this episode isn't for you.
Yeah,
Like
this
this
isn't for
isn't right. And it's not to get, rid of potential viewers by any means, but it's I want to be able to help the people that want to be helped. I want to be able to
you.
have conversations with people who want to have conversations. If you're just here to shut me out and you're just here to say, no, I don't like that, well, then why are you here? It's in a way, life is a lot better when you treat it like improv and say yes and instead of just saying no, and it's not a matter of not saying no at all because boundaries are amazing. But, you know, if someone's just trying to say, hey, and it's just a matter of, well, I don't want to. Okay, well, can we at least know why? And not because I need to be nosy, but like at this point now, I'm trying to put out an olive branch and you're just saying no. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't
Oh,
know. This feels that last sentence feels a little self-serving, and I don't mean it to be, but it's like,
well,
okay, well,
but
then I guess it's a moot point.
yeah, but it's also like if you can tell me why you don't find this helpful or why it's not working for you, then we can maybe figure out what does work for you. Or we could figure out like you might be like, well, doesn't matter because nothing matters. And it's like, okay, so really what the issue isn't that therapy or mental health things are not helpful or don't work for you. It's that there's a sense within you that nothing matters and that all of this is futile. So we still get to, like, there's still something to get to from there, right? So
Oh
I think
yeah.
that's the yes and is that even if you look at something like this and say, ugh, what, why? I don't want it. Why? Who are these women? Get them out of here. Shut them up. There's a certain amount of like, okay, but maybe you say, this isn't for me, but it can still lead you to a place of like, what is for you? What do you need? Why do you have this strong reaction, this strong negative reaction to us, talking about mental health or whatever?
Oh, 100%. And it's funny because it often reminds me of how I talk to my partner in regards to food, where I'm like, oh, what do you want to have for dinner? And he's usually like, I don't know. So I'll go with well, what don't you want for dinner? And so then it's like, oh, I actually don't want X, Y, and Z. And it's like, oh, so we can now narrow it down. So it made me think of that where I'm like, okay. But no, you're right. You're absolutely right. Like even no is technically it can be an end line, but it is also a good starting point as well to be like, okay, well, I know this is how to proceed going forward.
So, I mean, ultimately, I think what we're saying is that the overall importance is putting yourself out there, looking for change in yourself, looking for growth in yourself, And that is sort of what we are here to hopefully do, is to help some people start that conversation, whether it's with themselves, with someone else, or even recognizing like, hey, I need to find someone that I can talk to about this. And I hope that we can really, I mean, this is definitely self-serving for us in many ways, but I think that what makes me so hopeful about it is the chance that if we can just reach one person, even like outside of ourselves, outside of our family, that that will um that'll make it all worth it, I guess.
100%.
um and so with that, I think we just say, listen, life is hard, but talking about mental health should not be. And that's why we're here, guys.